Hey guys, my name is Matthew, and today we're talking about the things that Americans think about the UK that are wrong. As we were preparing to come to the UK, my wife and I were doing tons of research about the culture and the food and what it was going to be like over here. One piece of advice we ran into several times was that you shouldn't wear hoodies or hooded sweatshirts while you're in the UK because it's heavily associated with gang culture and Americans kind of stick out when they wear hooded sweatshirts and things like that. What's funny about that advice is it has not been our experience at all since being here. We've seen tons of people in hoodies, people we work with wear hoodies, people we go to church with, people who we just see around in our neighborhood. Tons of people have hooded sweatshirts on, and it's not weird or slovenly or any of the things that those articles said that it was going to be. So it made us wonder, what other things do people think about the UK that we have not found to be true? This doesn't mean they're not true anywhere or that it couldn't be true. I'm sure that hoodies in the UK at some point did have some close representation with gang culture. I don't think it came from nowhere, but that's not what we've noticed is true in the parts of the UK that we've been in or with people that we know. This list is things that Americans commonly believe about the UK, but they're just not true. Starting really broadly, a lot of people think that the UK is one country. A lot of people maybe think that the UK and England, that they're equivalent terms, and that's not true. The UK is, of course, built up of 4 different countries: Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and England, and not Ireland at all, which is another common misconception. Another thing that Americans sometimes believe is that the UK only speaks English. And of course, that's kind of true. You can probably speak English just about anywhere you go in the UK, but if you're in Wales, you're going to find that the signs are actually in another language altogether. In Scotland, of course, they speak Gaelic. In Northern Ireland, it's a different form of Gaelic, and it's a different language everywhere you go. Although English can be spoken, obviously, everywhere in the UK. Another thing about language is that Americans a lot of times think they have this great British accent, and it generally is either like some super high, weird Queen's English or some super low, slurry, Cockney type accent, but neither one of those accents is normally very good, and normally they totally take out this idea that the UK has hundreds of accents. There's so many different ways to speak English and so many different ways that it changes. Sometimes neighborhood to neighborhood, the accent is a little bit different. And to boil it all down to this one kind of generic bad accent and think that your accent is a good British accent is not really true or fair. A stereotype of people in the UK is that they have terrible teeth. I could really do a whole video just on this one topic. There's a lot to say about the way that celebrities have changed our ideas of what is right and wrong with teeth, and there's a lot to say about all those things. But the reality is that people in the UK have great teeth. Of course, there are exceptions, and you can meet someone who has bad teeth and things like that, but crooked teeth are not necessarily unhealthy teeth. And there's this belief in the United States that you have to fix crooked teeth, but they don't need to be fixed. They're just a little crooked. And so I think that's where some of this comes from, but I've actually seen some studies that say that people in the UK actually have healthier teeth on average than people in America. Look into it, you can find out for yourself. The next belief that Americans have is about the Queen. There's normally people who think on 2 ends of the spectrum. One is that she's this powerful monarch that can execute people if she wants to, and on the other hand, people think she's just a figurehead. The reality is she's somewhere in between those 2 things. She does have power. She can veto laws if she'd like to, and she has some powers in war and things like that, but she also doesn't have extreme control like monarchs of old did. Another commonly held belief about the UK is that it rains here constantly. And that's kind of true. I just did a video about like the weather this winter, and we had a crazy amount of rainfall this winter. Just a ton of both heavy rains and light sprinkles that just seem to go on for the entire winter. But you can see now it's absolutely gorgeous outside. It's sunny and beautiful, and that's actually the way our whole first month and a half or 2 months here was. It was just like this nearly every day. It's been like this for like literally a month, and we haven't seen almost any rain at all for like a month. So it's interesting because Hawaii actually gets more rainfall than the UK, more days of rainfall than the UK, and places like Sydney and Paris both actually get more downfall, more inches of rain than the UK as well, than London, for instance. So it's an interesting bit, it's a weird misconception, and sometimes it can seem like that because of the way the winter is, but it's not actually raining here all the time. There are 2 misconceptions that Americans have about food in the UK. The first one is that all of the food is just potatoes and beef all the time. That it's all super bland and it's all just like gray food constantly. there's something to this belief. A lot of the food here is potatoes and beef, and it has a lot to do with what is easy to grow in the UK. But there are so many varied food dishes. There's so many different types of food here. Curry is really, really common. Some people actually believe curry was made in the UK, and there's so many different types of foods and seasonings and flavors to have here. I definitely recommend you get around and try a lot of different foods. Another thing that people tend to believe about the UK is that people just eat all of the stereotypical foods all the time. Things like cock a leekie soup and spotted dick, which are both funny names, but also things like crumpets and fish and chips. And the reality is those things are not the normal everyday fare. The most common food to eat here actually is curry. So the food in the UK is not just the stereotypical things that Americans think of it as. The last thing I want to mention is about the UK and what people think about it in general. In general, the United States tends to think of the UK as like a mini the United States. Like the culture's all the same because we speak the same language, we probably live the same way. And in some ways that's true. Language and culture do go hand in hand, but even the language here is different than what it is in the United States. There's so many words that you can get mixed up in, and their definitions change, and there's new words to learn. And what that means is that the culture in the UK is also different than the culture in the US. That's what this channel has been dedicated to, is pointing out some of those differences, finding out some of the whys. And so if you thought this video was great, please feel free to search around on our channel. There's lots of different videos about food and the language and the culture, and we have really spent the last year going through all of those differences. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you like this video, please feel free to leave a comment. Let us know about other things that you might want to hear us talk about as well in the comment section, and we will see you guys next time.